What's up, everybody? How's it going? So today I am joined by Matt Upham. He graduated from a coding bootcamp just like me, and we are going to be dispelling common myths about coding bootcamps. Matt, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, so I'm Matt. I graduated college 2 years ago with an industrial engineering degree, and I ended up going to a coding bootcamp right after to transition into software in San Francisco.
And Matt is a YouTuber. I'll be posting his channel in the description below. Make sure to check him out. So the first myth that I want to bust is the myth that coding bootcamp grads aren't or cannot become real software engineers. You hear that a lot. I think there's a lot of people have this sort of, stigma or stereotype around coding bootcamp grads. You can't condense a computer science degree in just 3 or 6 months. And my take on that is that from a purely objective point of view, this is just false. There are a lot of coding bootcamp grads these days, not hundreds, thousands of coding bootcamp grads who have real software engineering jobs, real software engineering titles, so clearly they can be real software engineers. What are your thoughts on this, Matt?
So my take on this is that, yes, it's not a replacement for a CS degree, but the concepts taught in computer science degree and what is needed in the industry are not one-to-one. There are, a lot of things that they don't teach in college that you'll need in the industry. And a coding bootcamp is effectively a trade school that trains you how to perform well on this job. So they're basically cutting out everything you don't need, and they're only, focused on what you need exactly to perform well in a software engineering.
Exactly. On the flip side, there's another myth out there that tends to be perpetuated by coding bootcamps themselves, which is that you will learn everything that you need to know about programming or about computer science from a coding bootcamp. And I think that that's just not true. You will learn fundamental skills. You will be able to go from 0 to 80, if that makes sense. You will pick up the skills that you need to get a job in the industry. But you will be in for a long journey of learning, probably a lifelong journey of learning. And I think that, to be honest, that's probably because software engineering in general is a field where you just have to perpetually keep learning. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I think this is, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme at all. And
Right.
When you go into a coding bootcamp, I really do think that with any kind of learning, it's all about what you bring to the table and what you put into it. That's what you'll get out of it. So at least for my coding bootcamp, they really didn't teach us that much. They gave us some material, but we had to basically self-teach ourselves the whole way through. So if you think they're just going to, force feed you information and, prep you for a job and everything, that's probably not going to be how it is. You have to really stay consistent on studying on your own. And then once you get into the industry, that's when you really start learning a ton. The coding bootcamp will teach you basic proficiency to at least get in the door at that first job. But then you have to really, stay on your toes and learn as much as possible to do well from now on. But
Exactly.
That's the fun of it. It's a, fun, continuous learning experience.
Exactly. And I would say that, to add on to that point, they give you direction and guidance, but you have to be the person actually, moving along and putting in the effort.
Yeah. So the next one we're going to talk about is that they help you get a job afterwards. This is a pretty big misconception that a bootcamp is a golden ticket to getting a job. The job search is extremely brutal. They're probably not going to help you that much. At least for my coding bootcamp, they gave us a little bit of guidance and really not too much throughout the whole job search. And it was a lonely process too. So you had to build your own schedule, define all your own work. You had to reach out to companies. They really didn't have many connections they could, provide you out of the blue. So it was very, rigid and structured that you had to create your own rigidity after the bootcamp.
Right. And I think, to be honest, this will likely tie into the next myth that we'll cover, but I really do think that it depends on the bootcamp you go to. My coding bootcamp, I would say, was sort of half-half. They did help you in the job search. They certainly helped you prepare for the job search with your resume and your LinkedIn. And if they could, they would give you referrals. If they had connections in the industry. There was also a sort of career fair at the end of the coding bootcamp. However, I agree with you that they will not actually be hand-holding you through the process. It's not like at the end of the coding bootcamp, you will have 10 companies given to you by the bootcamp as here's your interview at the companies. Now you just have to pass an interview. It doesn't really work that way. It is very brutal, like you said. You have to put in a lot of work. But again, it does depend on the bootcamp. I think that There are more and more boot camps now coming up. The main one that comes to mind is Lambda School. You may have heard about it, that have an income share agreement. And coding boot camps that have an income share agreement, meaning you do not pay anything up front, but you will pay a percentage of your salary after you graduate. Those coding boot camps have a much bigger incentive for you to land a job, so they will very likely put in a lot more effort in helping you land that job than a coding boot camp to which you've or to whom you've paid an upfront cost already.
I think the income sharing model is amazing because it really balances out the risk between both parties, and it doesn't lop all the risk onto one side.
And that's why they're sort of becoming increasingly popular. So the myth that this one ties into is the idea that all coding boot camps are created equally. I've been hinting at it a lot now. There are a lot of boot camps out there. There's so many boot camps these days, and they are all very, very different. Some of them have income share agreements. Some of them you pay up front. Some of them are 3 months. Some of them are 6 months. Some of them are purely online. Some of them are in person. I could go on and on and on, right? Some of them are front-end focused. Some of them are full-stack focused. So, and I see you nodding, Matt, so I think you agree, right, that not all coding boot camps are created equally.
Yeah, so when I went to mine, I lived in a house with a few other people who were at different boot camps, and throughout the whole process, we compared and contrasted our experiences, and they were really, really different. I mean, they had a lot of similarities, but there were also a lot of differences. For example, one of my friends went to a coding boot camp where their goal was to kick out over half the cohort throughout the 12 weeks that they were there.
Interesting. Right, so it's like, so some coding boot camps they're much more about, let's get the cream of the crop, whereas others are more like, we want to make coding very accessible to even people who are struggling with it. So yeah, the coding boot camps they're very different, which is why you have to do a lot of research to find which one is right for you or which ones are kind of like bad and that you shouldn't go to.
I think probably the best way is to reach out to people who've actually been to these boot camps. So, doing a quick, LinkedIn search or something. I think contacting somebody and getting actual experience or evidence of their experience is probably the best way to go about this, because a lot of the information online isn't very clear and it's a little all over the place.
Yep. So one myth that I think is sort of perpetuated by the media is the idea that there are tons and tons of junior software engineering positions open out there in the industry. You always hear that the fastest growing field is software engineering, and there will be so many open jobs or unfilled jobs in 2020 or 2030 in software engineering. And yet, at least my experience seems to point to the fact that there are a lot of senior positions that are open. There are a lot of mid-level positions that are open. Companies want people with experience, at least, that notorious 2 years of work experience, but there aren't that many purely entry-level experience positions. Is that what you sort of experienced, Matt?
Definitely. And I think it probably also comes down to a supply and demand type of thing. I think there's a huge demand for, fresh software engineers out of college or out of coding boot camps to go get jobs. But a lot of companies, they take a loss on you in your first job if it's an entry level. Right. So it's there might be a lot of entry level positions, but there are also a lot of people going for these positions. So the open position amount, it's pretty low, relatively low to at least what the media is trying to portray.
Right, exactly. And actually, I'm going to tie this into the next myth, which is that coding bootcamp grads can definitely not get into FANG companies, the big tech companies like Google or Facebook or Amazon. Now, the reason that I want to tie it into this is because what you just said, companies tend to hire junior engineers at a loss, right? They're going to have to do a lot of training, they're going to have to do a lot of mentoring, and almost ironically, the companies that can actually afford to do that, to take that loss, are those really big tech companies that you hear about in the news like Google and Facebook. So I've actually found that companies like Google are more receptive to hiring coding bootcamp grads than companies that have only, let's say, 20 or 30 employees. And as an additional point to this myth, I went to Google, I was hired at Google. I know at least half a dozen other people from my coding bootcamp alone who went to Google. I know a lot of my coworkers at Google who had coding bootcamp backgrounds. So this really is a myth. You definitely can get hired at a FANG company as a coding bootcamp grad.
So the next myth is that coding bootcamp grads can only get front-end web dev positions. And this is pretty much not true. So in coding bootcamps, a lot do teach full stack concepts, and when you go into a company, they might need to place you anywhere. I had friends from Coding Bootcamps who got back-end roles. I had friends who got full stack roles. It was a mix. I also had, friends who got front-end roles and different people who, went into different areas. So it's pretty much about, are you adaptable and are you willing to learn, and can you deal with pressure, basically.
Exactly. And I know, for instance, someone who went to my coding bootcamp who then went to Google, and she had a back-end role to start with. So really, this is one of those myths out there, and it's just not really true or based in reality.
I think, for example, the current company I'm at, we're using Python in the back end, and at my Coding Bootcamp, I never touched Python at all. So It's one of those things I had to, learn on the job and figure out on my own. But I already had the basic concepts to then go and learn this.
So that's going to be it for this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. We hopefully dispelled all of these silly myths out there about coding boot camps. Thank you so much, Matt, for being here. It's interesting how we both agreed so much on all of these myths, and yet we had pretty different coding bootcamp experiences. And on that topic, Matt and I filmed a video on exactly that, sharing our different experiences and sort of comparing them. We posted that video on Matt's channel. It's going to be in the description and in the comments below. Be sure to check it out. Any last words, Matt?
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.